Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Hunt with Deep podcast. I'm your host, Luke, rolling solo again on the hosting front. Been doing this a lot by myself recently, which is cool, I guess. But yeah, I've got two guests who have both actually been co-hosts, so I guess I'm kind of rolling with the crew. But we've got Kerri McAllister and Evan Eisner. What's going on, fellas?
What's
What's up,
up,
man?
guys?
Yeah, this is a this is going to be a little bit different change of pace from our typical programming, kind of well within what we've talked about. You guys um, heard from Kirsty, and then we've talked about Hero Week, and this is going to be kind of the same vein of the bonus episode we dropped with Kirsty, which is we're just going to talk a little bit about Memorial Day. This is going to drop on kind of the middle of Hero Week on Thursday, the Thursday post Memorial Day, and yeah, we're just going to kind of roll through what this day and week, culturally for HLE and for us as individuals kind of means, because I think that sometimes some stuff gets lost with Memorial Day, right? Kirsty and I talked about it. Like, this isn't Veterans Day. This isn't a day about to celebrate vets and thank them for their service and all that jazz. This isn't, like, we don't run sales on Memorial Day because I think that, you can run a Father's Day sale, you can run a Mother's Day sale, you can run a 4th of July. Like, this day should be not about product and making money. It's about honoring and remembering those that we've lost. But yeah, I mean, let's open up with you, Kerri. Like, just kind of talk a little bit about your thoughts, as this day and week comes up.
Yeah, man. Well, first off, sales on Memorial Day is always awesome because saving money is great. But no, man. Memorial Day, you're right. It's not Veterans Day. It does get confused a lot. I get often, hey, man, thanks for your service. Well, I appreciate it, but this isn't for me. I came home, right? Um, Memorial Day for me especially, and I'm sure that a lot of other veterans feel the same way, man. It kind of brings up, and you and I talked about it a little bit, man. Just this wave of nostalgia, right? Because believe it or not, man, this GWAT guys, like there were some good times during the war, right? I had 20 years experience back and forth, and I'd go back in a heartbeat, right? Now, having said that, it also brings about a lot of guilt, a lot of grief, and a lot of remorse because you start thinking about those guys that didn't come back, and that list of people that I've worked with, I've served with, gone to schools with, just know that didn't come back. I mean, it's staggering. And then when you look at all the people that didn't come back, not just from the GWAT, but I mean, there's been guys that have sacrificed Desert Storm, Grenada, Panama, Vietnam. Like all those dudes are still with us, all the way back to the Korean War and World War II. Man, those guys are still around, still dealing with the grief of their lost coworkers, buddies, friends. Um, but while you're thinking about that, to me, those dudes aren't gone if you're still talking about it, right? If you're still telling the story, I mean, I know Evan's got a story he's going to talk about a buddy of his, man. Well, his buddy's still here because Evan's still keeping that alive, and everybody who listens, that person now lives within them in those memories. Um, so tell your stories, man. To me, this is the day to tell those stories, to share those stories, because people are they're more open to listening this time of year than they are at other times. But at the same time, man, keep in mind those dudes didn't die so that way you could sit around and cry about them, right? They want you to go have your barbecue, man. Drink your beer, grill your meat, have a good time, right? Um, Celebrate the freedoms you have because they sacrificed for you. But
Yeah, 100%, man. I'll touch on a couple points there and then turn it over to Evan. But when you talk about telling those stories, and that our little tiny little piece of that is kind of what was the, you know inception, why we had the inception of Hero Week, was to be able to highlight some of these guys and tell their stories. And everybody knows Murph, right? And obviously, and I'm not minimizing any of his sacrifice, and Tillman, which we bookend. But some of these ones in the middle that we run are guys that are kind of, their stories aren't told as much unless you're kind of in that CrossFit space, and you might do the workout here and there. But being able to highlight them, talk about their stories, talk about their sacrifices, like some of the ones we've got this year. I mean, I think we've got multiple Medal of Honor recipients on the docket for this week, or the week of Hero Week, and they did some pretty incredible things and sacrificed everything for their brothers. And these guys are like consummate fucking warriors. And it goes back to like the old days of warrior cultures. It's like you've got to tell those tales and tell those stories to keep them alive. And that's like the best we could all ask for, that go into that profession, is like you've got your brothers to your left and your right that'll keep that. And not, yeah, it's somber, and there should probably be some moments of reflection, but it's not a pity party. It's not sitting around being like, oh, it's more of a celebration, in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, Evan, what are your thoughts on all this?
No, I completely agree more. There's nothing that I don't want to say chaps my ass or gets me fired up, because I'm not going to say it really does that, because I try not to stay emotional about things. But I don't like, when I had social media, I used to stay off of social media on Memorial Day and Veterans Day because I would hate the posts I would see, and you would always get these freaking uh, bro vets or whatever you want to call them that are like, Memorial Day is not for barbecuing and drinking. Remember, and it's like, dude, typically when I saw those posts, it was from guys who experienced very little combat and did very little in their military career, or they were the kind of guys that were changing their profile pictures to them serving on Veterans Day. I don't understand that thought process. The same homies that are out there. This 4th of July, I remember, some vets in your neighborhood might have PTSD. Be respectful. And my thought is like, dude, fuck you. If you if you are so much of a crybaby that you want everyone else to cater to your fear of loud noises, then go somewhere quiet, homie. You know what I'm saying? Like, do not stop someone else from celebrating in the way they see fit. And I think that's goes along the same line with Memorial Day. And that's coming from someone, like Kerri, you said, everyone on this podcast knows someone who's been killed in action. And none of my brothers that died over there would want a pity party. None of them would want a day of sulking and sadness. And it goes back into, I have this conversation with civilians trying to explain the concept of war to them. When I was on my 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th deployment, and buddies would be like, hey, man, I'm sorry you got to go back over there. And I'm like, I'm not. Like, I can't wait. And they couldn't grasp it, and trying to explain that mentality to them. And it is sad, like my buddy Chris Solis, who I will always wear this bracelet even until you can't even read the name engraved on it anymore. But that dude went out like an absolute legend, and that's something to celebrate. He went out doing what he volunteered to do and doing it to the utmost capacity that every one of us would be honored to go out that way and have no remorse. And it is sad. He is survived by a loving wife and daughter. And those of us with families, like, we understand what that takes. However, I think any one of us that have share that sentiment would rather go out that way, doing something we love, something that we have pride in. And I don't mean pride in putting our ERBs all over the back of our trucks and wearing our freaking memorabilia around town to get those compliments of thank you for your service, but the pride in what you do, and you do it quietly, and you do it, that matters to me. And guys like Chris went out, like, I tell people all the time, like, they're like, I'm really sorry for your loss. I'm like, I'm sorry for his family, and I miss my buddy, but that dude went out better than, I would rather go out that way than in a nursing home having someone else have to wipe my own ass. You know what I'm saying? Or I would rather go out that way than in a car wreck or by something stupid in the States. Like, it's a very honorable way. And we all know in this era, right? There hasn't been a draft. You know what I mean? We all volunteered for this, especially in the combat arms side. On the soft side, we all knew what we were signing up for. And we all joined during a time of war post 9/11 to fight. And, it is something that I take Memorial Day, and I get goosebumps just thinking about Memorial Day oftentimes, because it reminds me of some of those just insane memories like you were talking about, Kerri. You would go back in a heartbeat. And ironically enough, yesterday was my last day in the military. I just signed out on terminal leave, and I wouldn't go back in right now, but if Afghanistan kicked back off, I absolutely would. You know what I mean? Because that's what it was about to me. And so, like, I love Memorial Day for the fact that it is a day that I talked to my wife about Chris a few days ago, when we were discussing some of this stuff, Luke, and I told her his story, and it gives me the opportunity to share his legacy and what an absolute stud of a warrior that man was, and how he went out and to receive the Medal of Honor. Like, it is something I have so much pride in serving with him and knowing him. And I'm not going to sit here and say like we were best friends, because we weren't, but we knew each other. I had a cell phone number. We were more than acquaintances and, less than best friends. You know what I'm saying? Somewhere in the middle there. But it was a true honor. And there is such a list of guys that are in my community that share the same sentiment, that are truly brothers. Like a guy hit me up this past weekend. Was like, "Hey man, I'm coming to town last minute," and he came over and crashed. Slept in my daughter's unicorn room. And it's stuff like that. Like you cannot see these guys for years, and they always have that. And that's kind of what Memorial Day is for me, is remembering that camaraderie, remembering those who paid the ultimate sacrifice, but did so voluntarily. And that is a strong message. And anyone that says you shouldn't be barbecuing and having a good time and remembering them doesn't understand it like the three of us do, and the other thousands of people around the world, that have lived that, seen brothers and sisters, pay that ultimate sacrifice, and you keep living in honor of their name, So that was probably a little longer than you wanted, Luke, but
no, that's good, man.
But it is a day. I like Memorial Day so much more than Veterans Day. You know what I mean? Like, I'm the kind of guy that on Veterans Day, if you're out somewhere and they're like, "Oh, stand up," I'm never the guy that stands up, and I never will be. But Memorial Day, like, that's a day I have a lot of pride in my service, because of the awesome warriors I served with.
Yeah, man, honestly, that was the coolest thing over the 20 years of GWAT, is the quality of people that we got to work with, man. Your friend that hearing the Medal of Honor, like, you don't get much more badass than earning the Medal of Honor. One of the guys I love to talk about and tell his story, and I try to tell stories about everybody that's no longer with us. But one of them, man, Drew went out, very similar story, man. Just he went out taking the fight to the enemy, man. Like, everybody talks about, "I want to die at a big pile of brass surrounded by the bodies of my enemies." Dude, that was Drew. Like, 100% to a T. That is how he went out. You talked about that KIA bracelet. It's complete silver now. There's no name. There's nothing on there. It is worn out, but I don't take it off. But yeah, man, every time, because you will, right? You'll get down on things. You'll start thinking about stuff. There'll be that guilt, that regret. Why was it him, not me, and all this other stuff, man? But every time I start to kind of sink down into that, I can see Drew's face going, "Hey, man, don't be a fucking pussy," right? And everybody that I know that's no longer with us, man, like, I know that they would not want you to do that. They want you to celebrate, right? But at the same time, tell your story. 20 years of GWAT, there cannot be a single person in the United States of America that does not have somebody that they lost due to the Iraq, Afghanistan, and some of these other places we've gone. There can't be. You can't tell me there's a single person that doesn't have anybody. Yeah. Now, they may not be like the best friends or a sibling, but they've got somebody they know from the community, from school, or something. But tell that story, man. When you're sitting around in that barbecue, keep their memory alive. Like, that's what this day's for. It stays for people who sacrificed for us.
Yeah, and I love that, man. And like, when I said I get goosebumps, like, I've literally been having like chills and goosebumps during this, this entire podcast, because it's a flood of memories. And Memorial Day to me is like, it's talk about guys that paid the ultimate sacrifice, and we think about men and women who were KIA, right? But I have another buddy. His contact is still in a group chat, because we refused to delete it out of there. It's a small team. Y'all probably both know about some of the teams I was on that I, due to OPSEC stuff still being highly classified. I can't go into detail about that, but we've had this group chat that's lived on since that 2018 deployment. And one of the guys from that group chat, took his own life. And he wasn't KIA, but that guy was one of the first. I think he was actually the first active duty soldier to go back on active duty after being amputee. He lost his leg overseas, and then he continued to serve. And then after he retired, he continued to serve, working for some agencies out there doing some contract work. And I don't forget about those guys either. You know, like he wasn't KIA, and the demons he was fighting. It tears me up that he decided that the pain he was dealing with was more than he could bear, and he ended up taking my life. But Memorial Day is a day to remember guys like him too. And then I have another brother, James Perez, who was on that mission with me and Derek Luke. He was actually literally right next to me when I got shot up that day. He was the one that I came to, and he was the first face I saw. And he ended up dying in a training accident. And ironically enough, Derek was the guy driving that truck when that happened. And it just, Memorial Day is for a day for remembering those that paid the ultimate sacrifice in combat. But I'm also reminded of those that I know that, either took their own life, which is a higher number than I wish it was, or guys that were, James Perez, the guy that died in that training accident, he was a man among men. You know what I mean? Like he was a short, stocky little Mexican guy. But when I vision him, I see him as like this 6'6" guy, because he was the epitome of what a Ranger is. He was an absolute stud, and I was this young E5 on my first deployment, and him and I became friends. And I looked up, we were this, I think he was honestly a little younger than me. But he joined at 17, I joined at 20, so he had been in longer than me, and he had multiple combat deployments when I was on my first. And just the way I viewed him, and like watching him on target, watching him on the X, like I always cherished that experience I got from him, and watching how he handled himself in combat. And he didn't get killed in action, but Memorial Day is a day where I can't help but like those memories come back too, because he's not with us. And so it's, for me, it's like it's a whole wave of emotion that hits. It comes in, and like you said, I think you have to allow that, right? We all cope with stuff differently, and I think one of the most important things is celebrate that shit, man. Like talk about it like we are now, because like you say, Kerri, that's how you keep them alive. That's how they will never die. Like I'm sure y'all both know, like the Rangers in the Sky thing. Like, man, that it's almost cliche because of how popular, support the troops has become. And, we'll never know what like the Vietnam vets faced coming home to a bunch of people who hated them. We were celebrated in our service. There's a very, very small population that doesn't support the troops, so to speak, these days. However, it still is worth, having those conversations.
No, and I don't think Memorial Day, I don't know the actual official, if it's for the ones that we lost in combat or not, but I do think it's all encompassing, whether they, were killed in a training incident, which unfortunately happens more often than we would all like, or they took their own life because they lost that final fight. Having these conversations, feeling the feelings, surrounding ourselves with like-minded folks that have same experiences, or those that don't, so they can get a better perspective, I think is so important. And when we look at where we're all at, like within this organization and what we're trying to do, that's really like the crux of it, right? Is like, this is how we deal with this. And if we've got a brother that's struggling or a sister, it's like, we're here for this. It's to have these conversations, just to have those check-ins. And like some of that check-in stuff gets a little hokey, right? Like, are you really going to like randomly, call somebody on a Friday night late and be like, hey brother, I just wanted to make sure you're not going to kill yourself. Like, no, it needs to be a lot more organic of that. It's not just like these random check-ins. It's like, build the fucking relationships that are consistently there around your people. Because if you haven't heard from somebody in 10 years, I don't know how you guys are, but like, I'm probably not going to just start pouring my heart out. Right. But like you two, who I talk to almost every fucking day, like, yeah, I'm going to be like, dude, it sounds stupid, but I'm making this video to announce, the Hero Week and all the clips and that fucking Three Doors Down song, which I was a kid. My dad was deploying when that song came out, which that was the nostalgia. Kerri was in because he's old as shit. But like the video, and it was like, and same as Evan, like I just got off active duty. I was like, surprisingly emotional about it. Like, sitting there like nostalgic as hell. Like, fuck, like, am I really never going to have even just the prospect of that experience again? It's like a part of you dies in a way, and it's a chapter of your life. And I don't regret getting out. I think I made the right decision, but being able to share that, and like Kerri, like, jumped on there and was like, man, that got me all in the feels. I was like, dude, me too, man. Like, just having that like conversation, I think it's just a little bit of a validation. You don't have to sit there and suffer in silence.
No, for
It's
sure.
okay to have those feelings.
Yeah, for sure, man. And like, and something that is hard to explain to people, like I'll be watching a movie with my wife, and it could be a tacky, cheesy war movie, but there could be a section that they get it right, and you get that feeling, man, you get those goosebumps, you feel your eyes kind of watering up, not because you're like some pussy crying, because it makes you feel something. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's hard to explain to people because it's not, you can, like, on a football team, right? Like, that's a good comparison that I have because I played football. I don't know. Did you play football, Kerri, or play sports in high school or college?
Yeah.
And I know you
High
did,
school.
Luke. Like,
Yeah,
I
I
remember
didn't go to college, man. I was in Fallujah, class of 03, 04. So
back in WW Fallujah. But yeah, like that, I say that to any listeners who's, never served, but maybe played sports or on a small team. And that's the closest feeling I can relate it to, but times 1,000. And I think because of that is when you're in combat, when you're in those austere environments where you're in the suck and you're sharing that, and there's such a heightened level of your senses. And then when you do it over and over and over and over again, and you get so used to those just extreme highs and then those extreme lows. And I don't mean lows like depression, but I mean when life slows down. You come home from that deployment where you were just getting after it every day, and then you have nothing to do because you're on leave except sit there and drink your coffee with your family, go to the grocery store, take your kids to the park. You know what I mean? And it's just like, it's almost like your body doesn't know what to do with all that adrenaline, all that hype, all that emotion. And then you watch a movie and you see someone that's killed and his brothers are, and it brings all that back. I don't know about you guys, but that's what it is for me. And that's kind of what Memorial Day does to me too, is it almost like I can't help but my brain starts playing that reel in my head of a lot of those nights, a lot of those gunfights, a lot of those rough nights, a lot of those good nights. And you can't help but feel that nostalgia, that emotion, Luke, you're talking about. And I don't think there's a damn thing wrong with discussing that. I don't think it makes you soft. I don't think it makes you weak. I think it actually makes you stronger to embrace that and celebrate it and look at it for what it is.
yeah, man, absolutely. And first off, dude, I never once in my life would have thought Three Doors Down would make me feel a certain way.
Same, dude. When I put that on there, I was like, nobody's even gonna get this. Like, I was
Yeah.
kind of like, it was like an inside joke to myself. And then Kerri's like, that fucking song, man.
Yeah, dude, that got me going, man. And you're right, Evan, dude. I have a hard time watching war movies now, not because like I've got PTSD and all this other shit, but you do get this kind of, it always starts with a wave of nostalgia, right? Because, dude, the GWAT was the most simple time of my life, right? Like it was chaos and there was difficulties, but it was very much like you were alive, right? Like nothing else can replace what combat does to you and what it feels like to be in combat. So it was the most real world experience that you can have. And when you come back to the States, and you come back to your normal life, man, it doesn't feel real. We live in a very artificial world. And when you're over there, and like you said, man, you're sleeping in the dirt, or even if you're at a fire base and you're just going out on ops every day or whatever it is, man, like, dude, it's pretty fucking simple, man. Don't die. Don't get people who aren't supposed to die dead. you know,
Yeah.
and that's it. Like it's what it boils down to. It's lethality and survivability, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
only things that matter. And so the real world is hard.
Yeah.
Combat was easy.
Yeah.
Emotionally it may be harder, but it was fucking easy. This real world is rough.
Talking about like stupid movies that like get something right. Hurt Locker, which is, as Evan being an EOD tech, like dumb movie, but that scene where he goes into the cereal aisle Like just talking about the simplicity of deployment, right? I had just gotten home from my first deployment, and I'm like on the phone with my girlfriend at the time, and she's coming to see me, and she's like, I was like, hey, I'm at the grocery store. Do you want anything? And she's like, I need shampoo. And I walk into the fucking shampoo aisle, and she's like, I'm like, what? Like just that feeling of overwhelm, because like there's no decisions on deployment, right? Like, you know, if you're back at one of the larger bases and you can go to a shopette or something, it's like you get pert or you get head and shoulders. Those are your two options for fucking. That's all you get, you know. And so it's like I got a 50-50 chance of getting it right. And like, do I want Skittles or M&Ms? Like, do I want whatever they're serving at the chow hall, or do I want this MRE that I grabbed out of the box? Like, there's no decisions that are small, really. Especially when you're in that kind of higher leadership role, your mind's thinking of all these things and contingencies, and you're just always stimulated and occupied. And then when you get down, and like I had to make this decision, and I was like, which shampoo? And she's like, the green one. And like I'm like, 3/4 of the aisle is fucking green. And like it was totally irrational. It was stupid, but I just got so like frustrated of like, what? Like the green one, you know? And like that scene where he was looking at the cereal, like that one resonated with me big time, because I was like, fuck. And like that, I miss that. I miss the simplicity of it, like what you're talking about, Kerri. Of, and like in total, like I have not had the same. My deployments, being conventional later in the war, were very different. You know, very different ways of being kinetic, I guess. With my second deployment, I was in the talk, doing strikes, that sort of thing. You know, and so there's also like the difference in the perspectives, and it's something that I've had to really come to peace with, because you don't always get the war you want or the experience you want. And we have these ideas of coming into the military, right? I'm going to go be an infantryman. I'm going to go do all these things as I'm coming up in the height of it. And I've got all these buddies that enlisted, and I went to college, and I was going to drop out so I could get out there, and I didn't. And and I think that like is something that I'm not the only one that struggles with that. A lot of my peers, and I was, when I look at it from a different perspective, I'm fortunate enough that I was able to deploy twice as a conventional, infantry officer during my time, because a lot of guys didn't get any, depending on the unit they went to. And it's like accepting the role that you had and the small piece that you played within it, and knowing that like it's okay, like that's enough. Like we can't choose what we get, and that's why like I hate the question, like when people are like, oh, did you see any action over there? It's like, one, like it's a guy that probably went through a lot of shit, and then now you're like making him, putting him on the spot to talk about it. Or it's a guy that didn't do anything, which I was kind of in the middle. Or it's a guy that didn't do anything that might feel some guilt because they weren't able to do anything. And it's like, that's a terrible fucking question. So don't ask it, right? Like if somebody wants to talk about that with you, they will, if you've gotten that kind of rapport. But I kind of went off on a tangent there. But yeah.
I mean, we're kind of steering a little bit away from the memorial stuff, but now we're talking about like just the mental health aspect of veterans, man. And so what you're talking about is guilt, man. All of us have it, right? I deployed 9 times. I still feel guilt all the time when I think about Drew, when I think about some of these other guys. And I wrote an article, and hopefully it'll come out before this, that kind of talks about this as well. But it starts with that nostalgia, then the guilt kind of comes in, right? Like you were talking about, well, I didn't get to go, run and gun and kick indoors and shit in the early days of the war because I was in college. I'm like, well, all right, but you did something, man. Like be proud of what you did.
Yep.
And there are dudes that, like, Evan's got less deployments than me. He probably has more gunfights than I do. You know what I mean? Like, does it actually matter? No, we all went out there and we did what we had to do. And dude, from the early days in the war, I remember 2003 in fucking Fallujah, Iraq, man. Like, the motto was literally, when it's your time, right? And so obviously it wasn't our time, and it was somebody else's. You'll still feel that guilt. Why was it him and not me? But dude, it's out of your control, man. So when you start thinking about, oh, in my 2 deployments, I only accomplished such and such, and everybody else did this, man, you've got to understand that, like, what you did brought value to the war effort. What you did brought value to America, to your troops, to everybody around you. And be proud of that. If some dude's trying to call you out on, like, oh, did you see any action? Dude, I can't tell you how many times, like, people, oh, what's the furthest you've ever killed somebody? What's the closest you've ever killed somebody? Dude, I went to go help set up for the MAF here in Kentucky, about 2 months ago? And, dude, one of the first words out of one of those dudes' mouths, like, how many people did you kill? I'm like, dude, are you fucking kidding me? What kind of dumb shit question is that? Evan, do you know how many people you killed? Because I sure as shit don't, Like, nor do I sit there and think about it,
Yeah, and I'll be the first to admit, I was that young dumbass, like super, like just. I'll preface with I was that, and Luke was the same way. Luke's dad was like one of my heroes. Both of my grandfathers served. Like I wanted to fight since I saw my first, Marine commercial or Army commercial, and I drank that Kool-Aid. And man, I was sold. Like I know what I want to do, and I kind of didn't really know what it was about. And will be the first to admit I would count there for my first few deployments. I would keep count, and then I realized like I had to like, what am I doing? Like that's not what it's about at all. And then to answer your question, Kerri, no, I don't. But as embarrassing as it is to say, I will admit publicly that I was that guy for my first two deployments because I I was angry at life, and it gave me an outlet, and I thought like that meant something. Like that was like a milestone. I don't really know how to describe it, but then I, matured, started seeing big picture, started seeing stuff through a different lens, and I didn't keep up with that. And I found resentment towards those types of questions. At the same time, like I try not to be too hard on people that don't get it. And because they almost idolize you, man. They almost are like, wow, this guy saw some shit, and like they want to, there's something primal about it, right? There's something that everything we've been talking about, it brings out some of that like super primal, like you were talking about feeling alive. There's a quote, and I'm going to butcher it, and it wasn't from a soldier, but it was someone who lived a very traumatic, like near death experience. And he said the most alive I ever felt was in those brief moments, and I can relate to that. And so it's like people who haven't experienced that want a taste of it because they have seen these movies, and there is this like Hollywood idolization of a war hero that we've all seen since we were kids watching war movies, Saving Private Ryan. Like the reason you're drawn to that isn't for the gore. It's for like that if you've ever been in a fist fight with someone and you realize like, man, I don't have a glass jaw, like, like I can take this pain, and like there's something primal to that. There's a lesson there learned, and like I definitely hear what you guys are saying, and I definitely share that. At the same time, I try in those situations, I don't look like I have been asked those questions, and I try not to be like, no, fuck you, dude. Like, don't ask me that question, because I resent those types of vets too. You know what I mean? Like, don't fucking talk, like, I don't appreciate being put on the spot publicly, but usually what I tell those people is, hey man, if I will talk to you about it one-on-one, not at a cookout in front of families and kids and wives. It's not the place for it, right? But like, hey man, if you want to know about some shit, like we'll go grab some dinner, and I'll answer any question you have, because I understand, because I was that wide-eyed kid that asked, I can remember asking senior guys that I worked with and deployed with. I wasn't asking them those types of questions, but I wanted to know what combat was like before I got there, And I do remember asking, and Chad, Luke, I remember asking him, because we were on our first deployment together. I remember asking him, like, hey man, I'm going to ask you a really cheesy question, but like, I'm nervous about this. We were getting ready to go out on this super big mission. We knew it was going to be hot. And I was like, hey man, what's it like the first time you have to pull that trigger in combat? And he's a super country boy too. And he's like, yeah, brother. He's like, you grew up taking lives. He was like, you grew up knowing what it's like and respecting that process. And you're not doing it for an ego kill. You're doing it for, to slaughter a cow to eat, or to sell, or to hunt, or to, you have to put down a farm animal. He was like, you know what that's like. And he was like, if you can get in the mindset of that, then, it's just another day at work type thing. These people are bad people. And it I'm not going to go into all the details of that conversation, because again, I think it's a little bit of a segue away from what we're talking about in Memorial Day, but there was something there that I was kind of like, okay, but what I'm saying is I was that super young, naive kid who wanted to know. And so I try not to chastise people who may be having some of that, even in their adult life, because they never got those experiences. And I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but
no, it makes 100% sense. And I try to do the same thing, is just deflect, right? Because like I've never shot anybody, but I've facilitated dropping a lot of ordnance, and like, which is a really weird thing. I always say that I fought my second deployment through a television screen. It's weird. It's definitely weird. I don't need to go into all the details, but like I was the same way, man. And like, I mean, me and you, obviously, we've grown up together, and our personalities are very similar. We were both very angry in our youth for a myriad of reasons, which I think is kind of a common thing that draws you into the infantry or combat arms or special operations. Not always. Some guys are really mature and they go into it for all the right reasons, but I think a lot of guys go in there because they've got a chip on their shoulder, which I 100% did through most of my career in the military.
I
Which,
definitely did too. Yeah.
which in some ways like pushed me forward, in some ways really hamstrung me because I had so much ego and pride, and I thought I was good at certain things and was in the wrong place. And I look back on like that second deployment where it's like all I wanted to do was be on the ground, like back in the fight with my boys, like when I was a platoon leader on my first rotation. And then I was like, when you look at it, I had way more effects than I ever would have had as a platoon leader with what I was doing. I mean, but I didn't appreciate it. The only time I was happy was when we were actually targeting, and like that was really immature and very selfish and just purely ego driven. And I was chasing it, man. Our EOD team that was on that rotation, they always wanted a gunner so their guys could get out and interrogate and shit. And I would, as a first lieutenant, would lie to my chain of command and be like, "Oh, I'm doing a ride along," and I would be gunning, like chasing a firefight, which like in hindsight is fucking stupid. And like I will say I never did that when I was a PL because I never wanted to get in that position. I watched guys doing that, and that happened on my second rotation. We got to change a mission, and the unit that replaced us, we were doing like base defense stuff. They were chasing. They were in a position in a place they shouldn't have been. Platoon sergeant got shot in the pelvis by a sniper, and it's like that was dumb. There was no reason to be down there, and so I never wanted to have that. But when it was just myself, I was reckless. I was thirsty for that. Just like Evan, right? You grow up, you watching these things, you hear your old man's and my grandfather, but same deal. Both our grandfathers served. I mean, everybody. I joke that I have like a Lieutenant Dan deal. Like everybody in my family, direct family, has been in every conflict since Lord Dunmore's War prior to the Revolution. That's how my family got their farm. Was a land grant from the king, and so like it's like what I was gonna do, and I think that a lot of guys feel that. And yeah, we're kind of getting off Memorial Day, but back to like the mental health thing, like as I've grown and I've matured, you just start to accept, one, your lot, two, your experiences, and being proud, back to that previous piece of like what we've all done, and you can't control it. And as long as, you didn't shirk it, you shouldered the load that you were given, and that's the best you can do. And I think more guys struggle with that than talk about, because honestly, like more guys don't get that experience than do,
Yep.
right? It's a small percentage, both in the combat arms and even in the soft community, right? Not every dude that goes special operations gets that experience. I have a lot of buddies that went special forces to the tail end of the war that like missed out on those kind of kinetic deployments within soft. Same thing, at the tail end with Ranger Regiment. Like some guys just weren't going, or if they were, they just kept getting like the luck of the draw where they were not hitting targets that were kinetic. And
Yeah.
that's oh fucking K. Like we have to know that, and it doesn't make any of what we did less. But it's okay to talk about that too. And like I've never really talked about this openly other than a few small conversations, but I just want to kind of articulate my feelings on it because this is Memorial Day, but I think this podcast is like a good way for us to kind of get some of this out in the open, because a lot of our listeners are military or prior military, or the guys that didn't serve that still carry the guilt of not serving. Like it's okay.
Yeah.
It wasn't your lot. Like it's not.
And
It's not okay.
law enforcement guys kind of fall under the same boat too, man. But I think they get kind of forgotten about sometimes when we talk about this.
Oh hell yeah, they do.
Yeah, but
When-
I mean,
Yeah,
dude,
go ahead.
that guilt thing is real, man. Like, dude, I chase deployments, man. Like, I admit it, man. Like, I was one of those fucked up guys who fucking loved the war, right? I still do. One of my biggest regrets is I didn't get 10 deployments. I had to miss out on our last Afghan rotation before I retired. But I mean, dude, all I ever wanted as a young guy was, I wanted to fucking die on a pile of brass surrounded by the bodies of my enemies, and I wanted fucking songs and fucking stories to be told about me throughout the generations, right? I wanted to be the fucking Ragnar Lothbrok of the fucking United States, you know what I mean? And it didn't happen, right? And all this shit, again, when it's your time, right? Like, that's what we said since the fucking war started, right? And so that didn't happen, man. Like, I'm here, I'm still walking around, dude. I don't even have a Purple Heart. So you don't think I feel guilt about that? I'm 100% disabled to just completely jack the fuck up. I've been to war 9 times. I don't have a Purple Heart. So there's guilt with that, right? There's guilt that, like, I didn't die on that fucking, compound where my buddy Drew got shot. I didn't die here. I didn't have all these issues. I didn't get fucking shot up by an Apache behind a wall like Evan. you know, like, all my shit came from, like, fucking bad jumps and stuff, right? And there's guilt with that, but at the same time, like, I've got to remind myself that just because I didn't get shot up by an Apache, or I didn't directly hit this IED, or the IED that I ran over was, like, it misfired, but then my truck behind me hit it, or whatever, right? Like, dude, like, you can't control that. But what I did do was I still went out there, and I did what I thought was right, and I did the absolute best that I could. And, again, man, war's simple, dude. Don't die. Don't get people killed. They're not supposed to die, right? Well, I fucking did that. It was all about lethality and survivability, and I did the best I could. And apparently I was good enough at the survivability part to where I came back. But you've got to keep talking about that. You've got to talk to your buddies, man. Just like you just brought it up, dude. You didn't realize it at the time, but you had way more effect sitting in a talk, even though you were pissed off about it, than you did when you were a line PL, man. And it takes sometimes talking about those stories. It takes me talking about how Drew got killed while I was fucking sitting in a goddamn parking lot at Walmart or some shit. You know what I mean? It takes talking about that, getting it out there, recognizing that you do have that guilt, and then it's all right. It's not a big deal, man. We've all got it. Keep it going, man, because you may tell me that something I did that I wasn't thinking about had a positive impact on somebody else, just like you recognize and you're getting confirmation that you had a positive impact not being on the ground,
Yeah. And it brings me into, like, I've had this quote in the back of my mind, and again, it's a super cheesy quote that I know you both are going to know from a very famous movie, Black Hawk Down, right? But I think it's one of the realest quote that any combat veteran can understand, at least anyone that does it for the right reason, is it isn't just out there. There are guys that do it for the wrong reasons. There's some true sociopaths out there that are not there for the right reasons. And we both probably have crossed paths with people like, we've all crossed paths with people like that in our career.
We may have used to been that guy.
Yeah. But in Black Hawk Down, where I forget the guy's name, Sergeant,
Hoot.
Hoot's talking to
Everest,
is talking to him, and he's like, people always ask me, why do you do it? Are you some sort of war junkie? And he's like, they'll never understand, they'll never get it, but it's about the guy next to you. And there's never been a more real quote, in my opinion, that summarizes, like, that feeling. And it is impossible to explain to someone that has never lived it, because you're not there. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I didn't believe in every mission. I didn't believe in every political reason that every war has been fought. I can't sit here and say that. But you know what I do believe in? I believe in taking that oath, and I believe in every other man and woman out there that's taken that oath on a volunteer basis and has been willing to go and do it so that someone else doesn't have to. And I respect that. And then when you're there, looking those guys in the eyes. And I used to tell people this all the time. I would tell young soldiers when they would come to the unit and try to give them this advice. Like, if you ever have and I know y'all know what I'm talking about. This guy was like, if you ever are walking onto the back of a CH-47, or you're, surrounded by some of the heaviest hitters on the planet, and those rotors are spinning, and you don't get that adrenaline dump, and you don't get that, like, this is amazing because I'm surrounded by some of the most hardened patriots that you could imagine. And they're not guys that are out there with 3%er stickers on their trucks. They're not guys out there with, sheepdog shirts, and they're not guys out there making, whatever, the facade of being some American badass. They're living it, and they're doing so at the utmost. And, like, if you don't feel some sort of humility and pride being surrounded by that, and, like, you know what, I'm going to do the best I can, like you're talking about, Kerri, for that guy next to me. And because I know his family, and because I've had dinner at his house, and I know his wife and kids, and I know who he is. I know what his heart is. You know what I mean? Like, that's what it became about to me. Not because I believed in every single mission, because I didn't. There was a lot of missions I went out on like, why the fuck are we doing this? This is going to get somebody killed, and it's not worth it. No damn dirt farmer in Afghanistan is worth the lives of my brothers that I'm out here with. But you know what? We're going. So I'm going to fucking be as lethal as I can and do my job, especially like as an EOD tech, no matter what the cost for me, to make sure that those guys get back home. You know what I mean? And and man, it's heavy, right? Like, it's heavy. And then you do have that guilt when someone does pay that ultimate sacrifice. And I don't know about you guys, but I had the analysis paralysis after a lot of buddies that got hurt or killed. And you're sitting there analyzing, like, what if we did this different? You know, like, what if we did this, and what if we did this? And it comes back to what y'all both said. You can't control it. You cannot change the past. You can't go backwards and live in the past. What you can do is be like, you know what? If you chalk it up to this, it might have been a bullshit mission. It might have been a mission where some fucking staff officer was chasing an OER bullet or chasing a star, and he was like, you know what? I'm going to send these guys out. I don't have to go out there to this fucking zero slant target where there's a cell phone pinging and you know it's a goddamn ambush because we've been doing this for 10 years and it just, everything about it smells fishy, and there's nothing about this fucking objective that is worth getting someone killed and someone dies. But if you sit there and you allow that anger to take hold, then you're doing it for the wrong reason, you know, and you're not thinking about it how it should. You're not remembering that guy that lost his life or that got hurt because he believed in something that brought him out there. And what did he believe in? It might not have been the mission, but it was something. And you know what? As cheesy as this sounds, for me, like, it's that damn flag, right? Like, it's there's a lot going wrong with this country, but it's still I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. You know, I constantly shit talk about the way things are going in this country, in this world. But I tell you what, I am super proud to be an American, very proud to be an American. I'm proud to serve with some of the most badass Americans on the planet. You know, like that. To me, it's not, I don't give a shit about what I did in my career, but like watching some of the most badass men on this planet do some of the most badass things, like that was something I am incredibly proud to be a part of and to witness firsthand. You know, like James Perez, like that guy was a stud, man, an absolute stud.
Yeah, dude, you're absolutely right, man. Just kind of just being amongst these, they're just absolute giants, man. Like, I was on the same ODA that Ron Shore, Matt Williams got the Medal of Honor from, man. And I've gotten to meet with those guys. Matt Williams is still serving. Obviously, you know, Ron passed away due to cancer, but you know, like man, I'm in these dudes' footsteps. I got to the team, you know, maybe a few years after the Battle of Shock Valley where they earned their Medal of Honor, dude. But like, I'm now in their team room, man. Like, I'm now representing their ODA. I'm, you know, flying their colors, right? Dude, it was awesome, man. My last Command Sergeant Major, Silver Star recipient. You know what I mean? And like, I'm surrounded by these people. You know, one of my best friends when I was down in the 3 shop, you know, his name's Nick Tuttle, man. He actually jumped in with Ranger Regiment in Afghanistan and became, you know, then afterwards became a Green Beret. But dude, just some of these dudes have just this absolutely legendary stuff, and they're not the Rambo types, man. They're not, you know, walking around beating their chest and all this other shit. They're just dudes, man. They're just really, really good dudes.
Brother, I'm telling you right now, me and that buddy that came, we're talking about almost that exact same thing. And I can relate to what you just said on such a personal level. And Luke knows this. Like, some of the guys I deployed with 2 guys that were on the UBL raid. I deployed with more retired Delta guys that were still doing it, working for agencies. You know what I mean? I worked with guys that had over 60 tours to Afghanistan. 60. I worked with this one guy, and I am not kidding you. He did 25 years over at the unit, retired as a squadron sergeant major, got out. And when I started working with him, he had been working for the agency for over 20 years. Dude was in Tora Bora. He had over 60 rotations to Afghanistan. You know what I'm saying? And when you talk to this guy, and if you saw him in Lowe's, you would think he was just somebody's grandpa out there getting potting soil for his garden. You would never know.
I think I met him. I think I met him at the gun club in Southern Pines, man, because he looked at me and he was like, man, he goes, I'm 50-something years old, and I was looking at myself in the mirror, putting my helmet off, my nods, getting ready to go on an op. I was like, man, what the fuck am I doing?
bro. And there's so many guys I met like that, you know. And I used to tell Luke, we would come back from a mission, and I'd be sitting in the chow hall with some of these old timers. You know, we're talking about ST6 guys that retired with 17, 18 deployments on SEAL Team 6, and then have been Lord knows how many missions working as a contractor for various agencies. And you know, I would just sit there with my mouth shut and my ears open and just absorb everything I could, because like you say, you're walking amongst giants, man.
Yeah.
And like hearing firsthand accounts of the UBL raid from guys that were there, hearing stories about Tora Bora, hearing stories about like the first missions that Defo went on. Like there was a guy, and I'm not going to name drop just out of respect for them, because a lot of these guys are still, you know, doing some hitter shit, which is crazy. You know, they're in their 60s. One guy, he literally, dude, is like 64. And I'll never forget this mission. Dude had beaten skin cancer twice, is running around Afghanistan, and we get in this gunfight, and he like looks annoyed because it's cutting into his time to get back and have waffles and French toast and bacon. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm like, Rotten, what are you doing, brother? You know, his call sign was Rotten because he looked fucking rotten. You know, and it's just like, man, like it is such a humbling experience to work and serve with guys like that have just like, I'll never touch in a million years some of the experiences they had and some of the things that they have, but just the privilege and absolute honor of being on the battlefield with men like that, you know, and like hearing their stories. And I learned so much. I'm talking about these guys have more tactical experience than the three of us could ever wish to accomplish in our life. And they, you know, they're literal tactical savants, like watching them, how their mind works and how they operate on target. Just, man, I learned so much from guys like that.
On that note, we'd be absolute remiss not to mention our own fucking dude, Derek, man. Like this motherfucker joins the army at like 27, 28 years old, goes to RASP, crushes it, goes to Ranger school as a fucking in his early 30s, multiple rotations, goes into some of the same stuff that Evan did, which we won't get into, then gets out, does some other stuff. And I mean, he's posted it, so I'll talk about it a little bit. I won't go into details, but I mean, dude catches a 7.62 round to the shin, loses 3 inches of his tibia. This just fucking happened in February.
Yeah, he's still recovering.
He's the medic on the ground. He's talking the guys through how to fucking patch himself up before he blacks out. Like on an op he didn't have to fucking go on, but it's that like, here I am, send me type mentality, like, you know, from the scriptures. I'm talking about chill bumps, man. Like he's one of my best fucking friends, man. And like that dude, you talk about a savant, he's a goofy son of a bitch. And then you watch him like switch into that mode. It's spooky almost to see somebody that's fucking that seems that, you know, West Virginia hillbilly, goofy, never takes anything seriously, and just the professionalism and his ability to do shit. Like it's one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. And I've worked with some, you know, special operations medics and like watch guys do stuff. And like, it's, you know, all of them are high caliber, but like he is a savant with that stuff. His ability to recall and like on the cusp be able to, I mean, you were there when he started teaching that class off the hip, like he immediately the switch flipped, right? And he starts just talking through every, you know, artery and vein you have in your body and your fucking heart. I don't know. It's just guys like that, like you're talking about, like that's the most humbling part of it. When I look back at my, you know, I was in the army for almost 11 years, and then like some of these dudes were just fuck. It makes me feel like, you know, this big, because I'm like, God damn, these are giants in a way. And yeah, and Memorial Day, you know, for me, it does become more than just the guys we've lost. You just, like we were talking about on the front end, just to kind of bring it all back. It just you kind of reflect back at the whole deal, especially with like the perspective that you and I have, being like freshly, like you're still on terminal. I just ended terminal, which is ironic that we're getting out of within a couple months of each other after. Yeah, you know, and it's awesome to be able to share these stories with guys that get it, because Kerry's not that far removed from his career either. And you know, and going back, you were talking about not agreeing with stuff, right? I didn't agree with anything. You know, I was conventional army during, you know, Obama on my first deployment, and Obama was really good for JSOC and the drone programs, but on the conventional side, you just felt fucking hamstrung all the time. And same thing, we're doing stuff where I'm like, we could get killed, or you know, not me specifically, but like if I lose a guy doing this mission, like I'm gonna be pissed for the rest of my life. Like this is not something we need to do. Or and then I was in the hospital when Caroline was having Barrett, and we were there for an extended stay when we withdrew from Afghanistan. And I still have a ton of resentment, and I know you guys probably do too, in a way, because it's like, what the fuck did we do for 20 years? Um, and that's hard to swallow. You know, I've accepted it. Like, it's back to the, and it took me a minute to get there, but it's like, it's back to the lot. Like, you know, there's the old, what is it? The Quiet on the Western Front. When he's just like, it's not our, I'm gonna butcher this quote, but it's like, not ours to wonder why, it's ours to do and die. Like,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
being a fucking soldier, right? We don't get to pick the war. We don't get to pick the rest of it. Like, you join, you put your name on the line, you answer the country's call, whether we agree with it politically or not. It doesn't fucking matter, because I didn't agree with anything we did on the tail end of the GWAT, to be honest. I mean, very little. From a, I mean, there was no strategy, and that this isn't the you know, the platform to talk about it right now, but I know for a fact a lot of fucking guys that spent time over there, and not just in Afghanistan was more of the publicized kind of failure, but Iraq was just as bad. My dad struggles with that, right? You know, like with what we did and with the withdrawal and the power vacuum, and then ISIS takeover, and it's gotten lost a little bit because of the success that we did have in overthrowing ISIS. But that was a disaster in our foreign policies, and like it's our guys, the GWAT era, that like kind of has to shoulder, because I have guilt of like, what were we doing there? Like the people that we did kill, like, not all those guys were evil. They just weren't, right? Like, some of those guys, that they were in a rock between a hard place, right? I put myself in, I try to like be fairly empathetic, and I look at war. I don't think there's necessarily good and evil in any war. There's shades of it across and throughout. And there's dudes that we killed that were definitely just 16-year-old digging a fucking hole. You know, probably got paid $5 to go dig a hole in the ground, and then have the actual bad dudes go in there and in place. And I don't lose sleep over that shit, right? Like, you picked the wrong side, brother. Sorry. Like, it's war. But the way we left was just so fucked. And the Vietnam guys dealt with, I mean, the parallels were just fucking unbelievable. Like, we just can't learn. But, you know, I say all that to kind of get it out there for how I feel about it. But I think if you're feeling that, like, it's okay to have those feelings, and it's talk about it with your guys that can empathize and that know, or sympathize, and they've been there, and they're having those same thoughts, because you don't have to do this shit alone. Because what we don't want to do, and what I don't want to do, is have anybody else, you know, like next fucking year in Memorial Day, like, nobody that I know or I've served with, I don't want to be talking about you because you lost that last battle. You know, like, this is about more than just remembering the ones we've lost. It's about taking care of the ones we still fucking have. And
yeah.
that's really important to me.
No, that's
Yep.
powerful, man, and that
Yep.
I could not agree more, because it's, you know, to bring it, to circle it back into Memorial Day, like that awareness that you just discussed, right? Like, it's pivotal for that mindset to make sure that guys have that sense of accomplishment. Because I know everyone that watched the withdrawal in Afghanistan felt something, and it probably wasn't a positive feeling. But if you can, and it's hard to do it, and I struggle with it. I still struggle with it, because like you, Luke, I still have a lot of anger for the withdrawal in Afghanistan.
Yep.
But at
I
the
don't think
same
that'll
time,
ever go away.
no, it won't. But if you can find something in there, it's just like we were talking about, you know, like the mission that Chris died on. I didn't necessarily believe in that mission. There were some good effects, but were they worth his life? No, they weren't. Because at the end of the day, like, I don't care, and it sounds harsh, but I don't care about that village in Afghanistan any more than I don't care about some shitty town in Detroit or Fayetteville. It's not that I don't care about humanity. It's just that if someone said, "Hey, would you be okay with Perry, my biological brother, dying for some bullshit town in Detroit?" No, the answer is simply no, right? But if someone told me, like, "Hey, he volunteered to go up there and try to help some people out, and ultimately he got killed doing that," I can sit there and choose to be angry about why the fuck was he there? Why the fuck did he have to die? Or I can look at it and be like, you know what? My brother did something honorable. He tried to go up there to help some people. He tried to go up there to do some good, even if he didn't necessarily believe in the policies that in place, what was going on wrong there. And it's the same thing if you can view war like that, right? Like, all the guys that have paid that ultimate sacrifice, and all our buddies that have been hurt or killed, or who come home and, like you say, Luke, lose that last fight, ultimately take their own lives. If you can be like, you know what, at least at least there's a lot there that I can see the good in all that situation and find that. And I think that's a great way to try to cope with it, because you're always going to have that pain, right? Nothing's going to make that pain go away. Nothing's going to make that anger go away for Afghanistan, but maybe you can mitigate that. Like one of the cliches we all know with military experience is mitigate the risk, right? Like if you can mitigate that, and what are ways you can mitigate that, and view it through a lens of the withdrawal in Afghanistan sucked, but there was a lot of good that happened. You know what I mean? There was a lot of good that happened through those 2 decades of war. And, maybe we didn't get the results we wanted, but there's a lot to be proud of. There's a lot for those guys that went over there and did that. And you know what? Like the community that we have, and the community that you put together through Hunt, Lift, Eat echoes that every single day in the group chats. You know what I mean? Where guys give each other a hard time, but at the same time, like someone will randomly put a PR in there in the gym, and like he gets, just nothing but positive reinforcement from everyone in the group chat, like crush it, brother. And then 5 minutes later, they're shitting on him for having skinny legs. You know what I mean? And it's just like that sense of camaraderie. Like I love it, and it's great. And if you can bring that into these really hard to talk about things, the loss of a buddy, the withdrawal of a shitty conflict in some foreign country, and not to get preachy, but just if you can work on viewing life that way. I've struggled with that, and I am just now getting to the place to where I can find some peace in some things that I've had a lot of anger that I've carried for a lot of years over, to include buddies getting hurt. I mean, the story of when my buddy got shot in the leg, Luke, and I'm trying to, because it's still a class, I'm trying to be cognizant of OPSEC here, but when he ended up losing his leg, and I was the first one there. I was the one to drag him out. I was the one he put on his own tourniquet, but dragging him out, it slid, and I like repositioned his tourniquet and was rendering him aid. I can't describe the anger I had after that mission, because the only reason he got shot was because a senior on the ground made a bad decision, a very, very bad tactical decision. And I was so goddamn angry about it because it was so unnecessary. And I spent months, years of, that should not have fucking happened, and being angry towards one person and casting all my anger towards him. And it's just not the way to cope with that stuff. It doesn't do anything except breed a negative headspace for yourself. And I think that can be what Memorial Day can also be about, is going back to the mental health piece. Like a lot of dudes struggle with that guilt that Kerri's talking about, and how to carry that. Like your buddies get hurt, your buddies get killed, your buddies take their own lives, and you feel angry because it's like, why did this happen? And if you can find some good in there, I don't know. I hope that's making sense, and I'm not talking in circles here, but
No, it does, man. And that anger that like a lot of young men and old men carry, it'll beat you up, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I meant carry as in the physical carry, not you carry, but probably you too a little bit, huh?
You said old man Kerri, so I just assumed you're talking
yeah.
about me.
But you've got to let it go. And it's been within the last couple years that I've really started to let a lot of that go. Some of it was prior to the military, some of it's been within the military. And just knowing that like it's kind of the cliched like Jocko, like extreme ownership. Like once you just take it on, and it's like everything in my life is my fault to a degree, and and obviously there's extenuating circumstances, but like the ownership piece gives you the power back, right? You don't have to sit there and like sometimes if it's a buddy getting shot, like wrong place, wrong time. If it's an operation that we shouldn't have been on, that's fucking war. Like that's happened since the dawn of time, where guys get put in bad positions, and maybe leaders make the wrong call, or maybe leaders made the right call based on the information they had, and this was just the unit that had to take the brunt of it. And like there's a bigger picture that we at the ground level, or at the still at the tactical level, don't understand strategically, that we don't always have all that information. Like there's calls you have to make, especially at that senior leader in the strategic level, that sometimes like one of those units is just going to get the fucking brunt of it, but it's going to set the conditions for the overall strategy. And like I think in GWAT especially, there was a lot of not happening. But I mean but that's war, and it's inevitable. And when you decide that you're going to go to war and put yourself in that position, you have to accept that. And then if you did do it and you're looking back, it's just an acceptance of like this, I'm not fucking special. my situation wasn't special. People were put in worse positions, worse situations, worse outcomes, and that perspective kind of helps, like back
Oh, for
to
sure.
circling back to like the parallels between Vietnam and Afghanistan. Well, at least when we came home, we got some free Applebee's, or we got people
Yeah.
thanking us, and we weren't getting fucking spit on at the airport, and we weren't getting called baby killers, and we weren't, like.
I got called baby killer once early on in the war.
Well, I mean, there's an element of that across the board, right? That you're never going to get past. I mean,
But
the
it's
shit that
not the majority.
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like the positive response, it far outweighs the negative, right? To the point of like being uncomfortable when people want to come up and talk to you about it. But like, I appreciate that. Like, that's something we had that prior generation didn't. Um, and when we can look at those little pieces and look at the good that came out of it, like trauma medicine, right? We like what came out of GI, we are so much more effective. I've got like 6 tourniquets in my fucking truck. Like, like the ability, the kit, the gear, like the advanced tactics in war that we're gonna be able to apply. Like how good fucking JSOC is at like striking, and like how we can integrate ISR, like communications, like all these things that have moved us forward over the last 20 years that have like spilt over into everyday life. I think I don't know when to say the good necessarily outweighs the bad, because maybe it doesn't, and I'm not the one to make that statement or that call. But I do think that those of us that struggle with that's what we've really got to look at and focus on is, yeah, did we maybe waste some time away from family, losing friends, having friends have changed the trajectory of their lives with injuries, the guys that came home, divorces, multiple divorces, and there's a lot of negatives, but there's also a lot of fucking positives, and those experiences and watching guys, and like I had a different perspective where like I'm not looking at these hardened dudes with all this experience, right? I'm watching kids, fucking 17, 18, 19-year-old kids step up and do remarkable fucking things that didn't get citations, that nobody talks about, that did these things that are incredible, that they can carry for the rest of their lives, and they were put in a position to do something extraordinary, and they fucking did it. And like those are what all this encompasses for me when we look at Memorial Day, and we look at, it's not just the dudes we lost, which is important, and it's that somber reality, but this overall reflection of where we are, and then knowing that we have to have these conversations, we have to come together, we have these platforms, and it's such a resource to be able to listen to guys like these. Like, I mean, there's a lot of legends that are going out on podcasts, like Clint Trial. He's on the Black Rifle podcast all the time, who Evan knows very intimately, and like listening to these guys' stories to know that like we're not the only ones feeling this way. You're not isolated. Most of your brothers and sisters have these experiences in this loss. Like, we've had multiple podcasts with Kirstie Ennis, right? Like above the knee amputee, had every excuse to just wallow in her injury, and she fucking climbed all 7 summits in the world with one fucking leg above the knee. Like, people don't realize how much of an accomplishment that is.
Yeah.
Like it's an accomplishment if you got 2 working legs to do it as an above the knee. Like those are the stories and the people that we have to look at and rally around, because if not, it'll just eat you up.
I want to circle back to something you said too, when you said, and I agree with everything you just said, but something that I really want to touch on is when you said it's just war, and if you can put that in perspective. Well, not only is it just war, it's just life. How many innocent children are killed every day from a drunk driver? How many trauma victims does a first responder see per week? And like a lot of that stuff gets overlooked. And I think us veterans can sometimes kind of be guilty of, like we get a lot of the glamour of it, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff that gets overlooked, there's not a Memorial Day for fucking innocent kids that get killed by DUIs. There's not I think there is like a National First Responder Day or Nurses Day, but like, dude, I tell people who are EMTs and firefighters and police officers who thank me for my service, I really try to go out of my way and like, listen, brother, like you have no idea how much respect I have for you guys, because the shit y'all see on a daily basis dwarfs.
Dude, we had to go overseas to go experience fucked up shit. They're in their backyard.
And it happens day in and day out for
and
fucking decades.
Yeah, they don't get
They don't get the reprieve.
No, they don't. And imagine that toll. And like, I think that is something that needs to be addressed more. And I'm
Yeah, I
taking this
agree.
opportunity to kind of throw that out there because, it is war, but it's also just life. And if you can, and I think how a lot of those badass men and women go through that is they have that perspective is I chose this life because I want to help. And how I'm going to help is I'm going to see some fucked up shit. And if I let that fucked up shit get the better of me, then I'm not going to be able to help. Right. But if I can compartmentalize it in a way of I chose this because I want to do something bigger than me. It's not for the salary because there's not a firefighter out there that's a fucking millionaire because he got his income. I'm not saying there's not millionaire firefighters, but it's probably because they made some smart investments or other things. Same with nurses, same with first, EMTs or, police officers. Like there's a big message in what you were saying, Luke, that could not only for veterans, but just people as a whole. Like if you can compartmentalize trauma and pain and anguish and things that you just can't find, like this is not fucking fair. And you're so angry, like I can't imagine a parent that their kid was killed by a drunk driver on the way home from football practice. And like the anger you have and can't do a damn thing about, you know what I mean? Like, imagine that helplessness, that hopelessness, that guilt you were talking about, Kerri, that we all feel when our buddies get killed. Like, imagine that as a parent, because I know how I feel about my children. Like imagine carrying that. Like, how do you live for your child if your child was stripped away from you? And like it's almost like this podcast has become a big thing on mental health, but I think that's great because it also, like, Memorial Day is a day where like it's kind of like Christmas. You either love Christmas or you hate it. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who fucking hate Memorial Day because they don't know how to cope with the loss that they've experienced. And so maybe mental health actually feeds right into Memorial Day. And I think it does because.
Yeah. Like I said early on, man, like Luke got me all in my fucking feels, man. And it started out nostalgia. Then it started going into that kind of, like I said, that guilt, that remorse and all that, like it definitely feeds into that. And, it's not that you don't think about your buddies, you don't think about the, what you did, on a regular basis, but it is in your face with Memorial Day, right?
Yeah.
Like CrossFit does a great job, and I'm trying to remember these people, and it's awesome, man. Like it's awesome doing Murph and all these workouts for these heroes. I mean, dude, that's one of the coolest things that the fitness industry has ever done. But it also brings it back into your face, right? So now it's no longer like, yeah, man, I experienced some fucked up shit, but I'm living my life. Now it's like, I experienced some fucked up shit and I'm living my life, and now it's right back in my face. And it's not a bad thing, right? Like you got to stop and look back. And like I said, man, keep those dudes' memories alive. Like keep them alive through your stories. But it does tend to have a negative impact on people's mental health, right? But you mentioned it before, man. Like help me help you, right? Talk about it. Tell me your stories. I don't need you to sit there and be like, "Hey, man, I'm feeling guilty because fucking this happened and this happened, and I'm over here." You don't need to open up like that, right? I think that's a big stigma within the mental health community, right? You get all these dudes talking about it, and they're like, "Oh, like, oh, there's a stigma for being weak." Like, it's not fucking being weak, man. It's you can't. When you are in such a deep, dark fucking hole, you can't talk about it. But what you can do is tell stories around it. I tell stories about Drew, man. I remember walking in his office one day and he goes, "Hey, man, just so you know, that fat Air Force kid just came in. He's like throwing a huge fit, and apparently he was secretly videoing you doing clean and jerks and dropping the weight, and he was pissed that you were dropping 100-pound plates from overhead." I tell those stories, right? And then, eventually that'll lead into like what Drew did, right? Like where, what he did when he paid his ultimate sacrifice. Telling those stories, it'll lead to that stuff, man. And, I got deep into like dark feelings very quickly, thanks to fucking Three Doors Down in a fucking 30-second clip, right? But
Yeah.
I started talking, man. I sat there yesterday, and I don't know if you know, Evan, but I sat in front of the computer and I started banging out an article, man. I went all kinds of different directions. I started talking about my experiences. I started talking about buddies, and it kind of got me back. I started telling their stories, man. I started, and it brought me out of that dark place, right? And I think more people need to do that. And if you don't have somebody to talk to, fucking tell me. I love sharing war stories. You know?
I've frequently had conversations with Luke and Perry about that. And Perry came down, it was a few months ago, and we had one of those organic conversations. We didn't, text each other and I'm like, hey, buddy, I want to talk about some war shit with you. There was none of that. It was just we we let the girls go have a girls' day, and we kept the kids. And then when they got home, they kept the kids, and Perry and I went to the cigar lounge. And then they closed pretty early, and we had a cigar and a whiskey. It wasn't anything crazy. And we came home in my backyard. Me and him just ended up talking out back for 2 hours about some of the things, and it was like I found myself just sharing stuff that I've never really discussed with anyone since those things happened, and I've done that with Luke on days, because Luke and I don't live super close together, but there's frequently times where we'll get together and then next thing you know, we're in a 3 hour conversation, just like talking about some of this shit. And then afterwards you almost like go, whew, like, man, I didn't realize I was carrying that. And it's good. There's nothing fucking wrong with it. And actually one of my buddies, man, is really, really cool. And it kind of segues into this piece is he was a Ranger sniper that was deployed with me. And, let's just say his skill sets were utilized overseas. You know what I mean? And he got out and he knew I was getting out and he just reached out and he's like, hey brother, I just want to let you know, man, I know your transition. I hope everything's going well. Here's some of the things I went through. Here's some things that helped me in that transition and going from that elite warrior to fucking a civilian, and the struggles. And we ended up talking about the Sean Ryan podcast, and you were talking about, the platforms we have now, Luke, that are a great resource that we have that our grandfathers didn't. And I think, I would love to shake Sean Ryan's hand one day because I don't like when people get on social media and gloat and they use their combat experience for fame, or for followings or for whatever. But I think like guys like Sean Ryan that are there and like they talk about mental health all the time. And these are, they have Delta operators, like not fucking, I'm not trying to shit talk people in a logistics career field in the military, but we're not talking about guys that did nothing in their military careers. We're talking about some heavy hitters that are allowing vulnerability that is unheard of in our grandfather's generation of war. That didn't happen. And you wonder why so many of them came home and had drinking problems, you know what I mean? And so many of these issues and like the stuff Sean Ryan's doing for those communities and talking about mental health and allowing people to tell their stories, but with an intention of not a following, but to share and to keep those stories alive. And like what he says, to document these things so that people know what it was like, and like, imagine how many, like, I know you guys probably love watching World War II documentaries because it gives you a glimpse into things. And like, that's kind of what these podcasts are going to do for people 10 years when our children are like, oh, my father fought in the GWAT. Like, I want to learn about the GWAT. These podcasts are going to be there to kind of give those generations, some real perspective of what's that like. And I think that's amazing. It's not some dude on Instagram for clout who's, just chasing a fucking following. But there's a legitimate purpose behind it. And I think it's amazing, man.
Yeah. Telling, like, how many stories have we lost, from World War II, World War One,
Vietnam,
Civil War,
dude, even
Vietnam.
the shit in the 80s, man.
Like that's John Stryker Meyer, like telling the Mac v. Sog stories, man. Like those don't even sound real. Like if you watch that in a movie, you'd be like, this is the most Hollywood shit I've ever seen. Like these guys did stuff that it's literally unbelievable.
I had to read that book twice because I had moments where I was so engulfed in that book, I couldn't tell if I was like dreaming things and exaggerating. You know what I mean? Because it didn't, like you said, it didn't feel real. Like it's unbelievable. And thank God he wrote that book.
Yeah. And it's his mission to capture those stories because they're losing guys. Like guys that were on Jocko have already died, from the cancer stuff and all that, which we're dealing with within GWAT too. But like, yeah, there's a yin and a yang to social media. There's a yin and a yang to podcasting and all this stuff. And I struggle with it, right? Because like, where's the line? What are we doing? How do we tell stories by not chasing clout or whatever that everybody wants to call it these days? And I don't have that answer yet, and I haven't solved it. And we get a lot of hate for different things. And
I think it's just being genuine, man.
I think so.
Not a chest beater.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, man. Like,
Well, there's always going to be haters too, and who
Oh, for
fucking
there
sure.
is, yeah.
and who
And that's
fucking
fine.
cares? Yeah,
But I think that it's better that we at least get this shit recorded. Like one of my biggest, like, not regrets necessarily, because how could I know, but like I wishes is that like I had started this while my grandfathers were still alive. Like being able to sit down with my grandfather, who was a World War II vet, another one who was, in Korea, like being able to talk to them about their experiences, whether they were, like my grandfather was on my dad's side was a logistician in the Air Force, right? Like he wasn't MacVSOG, but I mean, he still had experiences and stories that are worth telling that are now lost forever. And I think that, there was an opportunity there that I missed, and I'm glad that it is happening. And there's guys like Sean, the Black Rifle guys. I mean, Mike Glover's going through a lot of stuff now, but like he has done good in that space. We'll see how all that shakes out for him. But,
I didn't
you
know
know,
about that, but on social media.
yeah, I don't know. I don't want to get into it. I have no idea. Complete outsider. But like, I'm glad that that's happening, because it's important that we capture this, because it's not just for those individuals to be able to tell their stories, for the therapeutic effect that that's having on them. And it's not just for us being able to listen to them to understand. Cause I read Tom Satterley's All Secure, and like it's like, we tend to like look at these Delta guys, right, like Black Hawk Down, and you just hearing the stories through GWAT, and you put them on a pedestal, right, these tier one operators, and then you realize, as you grow up and you mature, like they're just fucking dudes too.
Yep.
They go through the exact same stuff. They just put themselves in positions and succeeded in hard selections and they're hard men, but like they're still going through the same shit. And listening to Tom open up changed my entire perspective. I think I've bought like 6 copies of that book and sent it to buddies. I don't know. I at least told you about it if I didn't send you a copy of it. And like, there's healing power in that by listening to them, not just telling them, but then it gives you the motivation to be able to go talk to other people, and the empowerment and the permission that, yeah, we can fucking talk about this.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And again, I will publicly say this because I am, dude. Luke knows this, but I'm a blunt motherfucker, and I really don't give a shit about any haters. I couldn't care less. So let someone hate on what I'm about to say, and I don't care. But I there for a long time, I was like, I don't have PTSD, and I kind of thought something was wrong with me. And I was like, I sleep great after really rough things. I after engaging the enemy and taking violence, I slept like a baby. And I always had this thought, like, man, I don't know what these guys are experiencing with PTSD, and they're like almost became this false symbolism of PTSD that I blame Hollywood almost exclusively for in the media, because they took advantage of soldiers coming back that were struggling. They almost like played it up into this, whatever personified thing that that I never experienced. I never saw anyone hear a bang and dive under a desk at work. Like that wasn't real to me, but you saw that in movies and shit. And so, cause I thought that's what PTSD was. It was like on this extreme. And then I listened to Tom Satterley on the Sean Ryan podcast this year, after all my deployments, and after hearing him talk, like it almost made me break down in my truck, because it was like, fuck, I have PTSD. And it wasn't in the sense that I thought PTSD was. And just like hearing this guy, like you say, it almost gives you permission to feel that. It almost gives you permission to say it, because like, okay, if this Delta operator can dive into himself enough to be like, dude, you were a fucking piece of shit. You treated people like shit. You were an angry asshole towards your kids, towards your wife, towards people you love, because you didn't know how to cope with this shit. Like that's like, there's a lot there that's real, and it hit me hard, because like, man, I could relate to that on a level that I never thought that I could. Does that make sense? Like
Dude,
it
I'm
was
glad
something
you
that was,
recognize that already,
yeah.
man.
And my wife and I, again, I have no problems going public with this. Like we reached out to the All Secure Foundation, and we have been doing marriage counseling through the All Secure Foundation, and it has insanely improved our marriage, like, and we've been doing that for a few months now. And like, I am so thankful for men like Tom, men like, Dom, what was his name? He was a SEAL. He was on there. And then there's another Tom Spooner, who I'm actually in the middle of that Sean Ryan podcast. And I'm so thankful that these guys are putting their egos and their prides aside, these tier one operators who, probably in the height of their career, if you would have asked them, hey, are you ever going to get on a fucking public forum that's going to get millions of views and talk about PTSD and your experience with it, they're going to be like, absolutely not, because I don't have it, but now they are. And like, that's great. And I love that because it's given me, like, and I'm sure countless other vets, my buddy who just got out, who was a sniper I was telling you about, we shared in that. And he was like, I'm so glad you saw that, because I was going to tell you about that and look into that. And like, you just brought it up, Luke, and me and you haven't talked about that, but like, it's a shared experience that we have. And like, I, with you, like, truly resonated with a lot of the things Tom said, because it's not PTSD as has been glamorized by Hollywood and the media, but it's this more real everyday, like how to cope with those grocery store situations you were talking about earlier, Luke, or your kid's crying and you can't fucking figure out why, because he's one and he can't talk. You know what I mean? And you're losing your mind. Like I used to tell people all the time, I'm a very, very high intensity person, but like in a gunfight, I am one of the coolest people you ever meet. But you put me in a room with a crying child that I can't console, and I fall apart. Why? And I started exploring some of that shit, and it's been great, man.
Our population thrives in chaos, and that's when problems arise, is when the chaos isn't there, right? So when you're dealing with normal life, so I'm super happy, man, that you have recognized that this early, because I'm going to tell you right now, I got diagnosed with PTSD before I left the military. I had gone through behavioral health because they told me I needed to, right? They said not like I got command directed, but like, hey man, you should probably go, make sure you're clean out the attic before you get out. And I was like, yeah, sure, cool, maybe I have PTSD. I don't know. I didn't really think nothing about it, man, until last summer, driving back from dropping my kids off, because I get the kids during the summer. I broke down in the middle of the car, man. Like driving home, dude. Broke the fuck down in the truck, dude. Like, I'm a fucking 38, 39-year-old Green Beret's been to war more times than I can count, and I fucking broke down in the truck, dude. Just everything hit me at once, and it was about not quite a year after I had left the military, man, but it was after that transition, because while you're there, you're surrounded by people with similar experiences. And so nothing seems out of the ordinary, right? Like I said, we thrive in chaos. And when everybody's chaotic and you're chaotic together, it becomes your normal. Once I left the Army, dude, like, my normal was everybody else's normal, which was abnormal to me.
Yeah.
And, dude, it caught me, man. Like, I'd blown up a few times on the kids, probably got a little more angry than I should have over the summer, dude. And just some things like that, dude. It all came hitting me, man. So, dude, good on you, man. Good on you for taking those steps to kind of mitigate some of those future problems that could have happened. Man, it's awesome.
Well, there's been plenty of problems that I didn't mitigate that are staring me in the face, that I'm having to look in the mirror and have a gut check, and that and a lot of this journey, and again, it all circles back like Memorial Day and like how to live to honor those guys' memory. You can continue going down a path of being an angry fucking asshole and destroying relationships that you have and loved ones and hurting them and doing all that. Yeah. Or
I'm on my third marriage. I get it.
Or you can live up to the legacy, like the guys like Chris and Drew, and they don't get to go home to their wives. So, like Howard, if in 10 years I became a dysfunctioning drunk and an angry fuck who can't get my life together, and I got an opportunity to have a discussion with Chris, and he says, hey man, how you been doing? How, you know what I mean? Like, if you can put yourself in that, like, I wouldn't be proud to tell him how my life was at that, and he didn't get the opportunity, you know what I'm saying? So like it can all circle back into itself if you allow it to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think the awareness that we're able to have through others' experiences is unique. I don't know that anybody has had this throughout the history of warfare, and I think there's no excuse anymore for not getting the help and not taking that hard look at yourself. And like, that might sound a little callous, but there's really not. It's like, it's willful ignorance at this point, because like just learning like the psychological and physiological impacts that, because I like that Tom he uses PTS and not PTSD, because it's not a disorder. It's a natural response to trauma, and it doesn't have to be, and this is something that I've struggled with, and I've never talked about this, so this will be interesting. Like I don't have that like crazy traumatic. I've seen dead bodies, I've seen dudes wounded, I've some of that, like that shit like never really in the moment bothered me. Like I can compartmentalize and detach fairly well. Um, but it's some of it's just like that constant switched on, especially like being a leader and having to like be thinking contingencies. Like I can't turn that shit off, and that is its own form of like post-traumatic stress, right? Like I was at Red Rocks at a fucking Shane Smith concert a little while ago, and I don't know if Red Rocks has got these big cliffs and you're looking down. I couldn't stop thinking like we're in a fucking bowl, like we're absolutely, there's zero cover and concealment. I'm running through like all these things because there's shooters at concerts, right? The same week that we did that, there was a shooting in a concert in Alabama, and so like I'm running through this, like how the hell am I going to get my wife and I out of here? And like in the past, I've coped through that kind of shit just by drinking. I quit drinking. I haven't drank in 5 months. And now all that shit is very painfully present, but it's forcing me to actually address it. I got a panic attack and it wasn't like a physical panic attack where I was breathing in a bag. It was all internally in my head, but I walked into a Shield, or not a Shields, a Buc-ee's with my son in East Tennessee on like Christmas, the weekend after Christmas. And it was just a madhouse. There was probably several thousand people in this fucking large gas station. And you sit there and it's like, it's hard to admit it to yourself, right? Like you're like it's almost for certain guys, like you almost feel like you haven't earned it. You haven't earned the ability to be able to acknowledge that you have that. And, but then like looking at it, it's like, it, I've, I don't know how you're going to put this in words, but like you can't change it. Like back to what we were talking about before, the experiences are your experiences. They might manifest themselves differently, but the physiological and the psychological responses are the same. Like I can't stop contingency planning. I can't stop thinking through these things. And that's honestly a benefit in a way because I can have that level of preparedness, but it's being able to like just work within it and acknowledge to myself that that's something that's real. And whatever we want to label it as, I'm a different person than who I was 10 years ago when I came in to the
100%.
military. And that's okay. And talking back like Sean Ryan, I was on deployment. I was going through like a really rough patch. I just changed command. Carolina, I was able, this is a non-combat rotation to Eastern Europe, and I was able to fly Caroline out. So like I changed command, Caroline came out. We did like, I don't know, a week, and we never had a honeymoon. So that kind of went all out. Had this honeymoon. And then I didn't leave the FOSS that we were on, the base in Bulgaria. Like usually when you change command, you leave the unit. Well, I stayed there, which was good because I didn't have to move to Poland across Europe to get to the brigade. But it was a really shitty experience for me because I went from like being consumed with my guys and planning and like worried about all this other shit to where I had nothing. I didn't really have a job. And I've never really gone through depression, but that was like a stint of it for sure. And like I was like, I'm an early riser. I get up, get after it. I was like laying in bed till like 10 a.m., like sitting on my phone, just laying there, like just was in this kind of shitty place. It was actually an HLE. It was the ruck challenge we did. That was like got my ass moving again. And I was like, I could just sit here and wallow in like whatever I'm going through, or I can use this physical challenge. And like, dude, I went crazy. I ended up having to end it, but I was doing like 18 miles a day. But I was listening to Kyle Morgan, who's a Delta operator who responded to Mali. And going back to the booze thing, I always would be like, oh, I don't have a problem with drinking because I can stop whenever. And I would always do like dry January. And that was like my proof to myself that I don't have a problem with alcohol because I can quit whenever I want to. He was the first person that's ever talked about that I've heard, where he's like, just because you can control it doesn't mean that it's not an issue. And I'm not saying I'm never going to drink again because I probably will, but I just decided like I'm not. And it took me another year and a half to like come to this after listening to this podcast, but it's resonated. And listening to him, like I was drinking to cope with those social situations, with the ability to slow my brain down because, the entrepreneur thing, like I'm like hypomanic. So like my brain's always running 100 miles an hour. So it's how I could like slow down and kind of feel normal in a way. And if I knew I was going to a concert, like I've gone to two concerts I've never been to a concert in like 3 years in the last month. And they were crazy. And I was painfully sober throughout them, but it just really like allowed me to look in and like have some introspection on like how am I responding to these situations. I'm not just putting numbness on it. I'm not telling, like there's very few positive reasons to drink if we're being honest and looking at it objectively, but I'm not telling people they shouldn't drink. But if you do find yourself drinking to cope, try to just cut it out and put yourself in those positions where you would normally do it, and you're going to be painfully aware of a lot of those issues you may be having, and it's going to highlight it, and you're not just numbing yourself, you're not just time traveling through those events. And that's helped me over the last 5 months to really work on myself and acknowledge some of the stuff that I might be dealing with.
So my thoughts on drinking. I drink more beer, well, mostly beer, than probably anybody you've ever met in my life. And dude, I'm gonna tell you right now, man.
Evan and I might give you a run for your money.
I don't. I used to brew my own beer, man. I had buckets of beer being brewed in my house at one time, man. And dude, I was a very very big beer connoisseur. But anyways, I found, man, like I was drinking more and more. It went from being like, oh, I might have a beer or two tonight, and then it started going, oh man, I just finished that six pack. Better go get some more. You know. And all the problems that I had, because we've all got problems. I don't care who you are or what you've done. You've got some issues, but all of my problems got so much worse. My mental health degraded so bad just because I was constantly feeding it with booze, man. And it's an antidepressant. So there's so many things that, I mean, alcohol is a
A
poison.
depressant. It's a
Dude,
depressant.
yeah, it's a depressant. Alcohol is a poison, and it does all kinds of bad things for you. But one of the most severe for especially guys who have experienced some of the things that we have is that depressant piece, man. And so I quit drinking, I don't know, 5.5, 6 years ago, something like that. And dude, if I could go back and redo my whole life over without booze, I 100% would. And I truly believe that alcohol is a huge, if not the biggest factor in veteran suicide, man. Because I'm gonna tell you right now, I know so many people that never. I guarantee you, they didn't have plans to commit suicide. They didn't want to die. It was a spur of the moment thing because they're dealing with issues. Then they added booze on top of it, and I know this because I've been in that situation, and luckily I'm still here. You know, if you are struggling in any way, shape, or form, man, for one, please cut out the booze or whatever type of self medication that you do. And then please just tell your fucking story. Tell it to me. I don't care. Whoever. Tell it to somebody. Yeah.
Yeah. Memorial Day obviously means a lot to it means different things to different people, but I think kind of the crux of everything we're talking about is it's okay to have feelings. It's okay to have it come up, um, to have those feelings come up, but communicate, like build your, our, it doesn't have to be with us, but like the whole motto of our team is find your tribe, and do that. Like surround yourself with like-minded people with similar experiences in the same value sets. And that's like the most important piece, is like you have to have the same values, and talk to people, talk to your network, communicate. Like you might not want to dump all this onto your spouse, and that's okay. Like I don't, she knows a little bit, but like being able to have this conversation with guys like you that have similar experiences is so important. And like this podcast has been therapeutic to me. Like I got a massage the other day. I haven't had one in a while, and it's like I didn't realize how tight I was until she started getting in there. And that's the same effect of like this, is like being able to talk about it. And I think, Evan, you mentioned it earlier, like you don't even realize you're carrying stuff. And then when you say it out loud and you say it to people that can hear and acknowledge and resonate, like it just, you like feel a release, or you're like, oh fuck, I feel a little better. And then you start to hear other people's stories and listen to podcasts, and you realize, like, I'm not alone in this. Because that's, I mean, when we look at what happens with suicide, like most of them, it's marital, it's relationship problems coupled with booze, and that's the trigger. That's like not every single time, but that's the very big common denominator. And the other piece of this is isolation, where guys feel like they're alone, and they think that they're a fucking liability, especially coming from like high intensity, high motor guys that then fall out of whether it's through injury or through retirement or transition. It's like they lose that sense of purpose. And I was fortunate to learn from other guys, and that's why I started what we have here with HLE, is because I saw that myself. I could learn from these other guys and be like, that's going to be me. I'm going to be a fucking drunk, and I'm probably going to kill myself if I don't have something to get out to. So I jumped out of the army straight into like investment banking, and no offense to investment bankers, are like going to work in a cubicle and getting into that rat race. Like I would have lost my mind. Like,
Yeah.
and, but having the ability to have those hard conversations with yourself, I think is really important.
I agree. And like what you were talking about, Kerri, it doesn't help that the community that the three of us have spent, the majority of our adult life, it's
revolves
almost like
around alcohol.
if you don't drink, you're chastised and bullied and not part of the club. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And
You can't trust a guy who doesn't drink. I fucking said that.
yeah,
I've been the guy I've been the guy that's like, dude, just have a fucking beer with me. Like,
yeah, I have
how
too.
fucked up is that?
I'd say we all have. And then you look at it and like, dude, that was a really shitty fucking way to look at this. And I'll be the first to admit, I still drink. But I do not like getting drunk. I don't like myself when I'm drunk. There's almost, like you said, there's almost no good that comes from that. I don't enjoy the feeling. I don't enjoy the feeling the next day. I don't enjoy not feeling in control of myself because, like, I don't know. Like, it doesn't. In the worst places I've been mentally, and Luke can attest to this. I mean, in those moments where I was on those heavy deployments and doing shit and fucking went through a divorce and was not in a good place mentally, and how I dealt with that. If we weren't going out on mission, I was fucking killing a bottle of Jameson and ultimately calling Luke or Perry, whichever one answered first. You know what I mean?
That
And
was my trip when I was supporting the same folks you worked with.
yeah, and it like
That's one of the worst things we fucking do is
yeah,
give guys in that environment access, like free access to alcohol. Like, it's fucking in conventional side, there's you still get it, but like it's not the same level that like in some of those units or
I mean, we had bar night. You know what I mean? Like,
OGAs.
you
Yeah,
had
like
fucking
it's crazy. But to your point on
and
the culture, dude, it's insanity. It's the boozing and it's the fucking infidelity that
yeah,
is just like it's one of the I mean, there's a lot of reasons why I got out of the army, but like this last deployment where I'm watching senior leaders like openly like basically validate soldiers who are cheating on their wives as long as it's and their spouses as long as it's consensual is like, what are we teaching these young kids
yeah.
who are in the throes of like their moral development to like allow this to be okay?
And when show me a story where you see an 80-year-old who was like, "No, I'm really happy. I fucking am a drunk." You
Yeah,
know,
I'm a drunk or I'm
show
on
me
my
show me someone who came to like the later part in life and looked back and like, "No, I'm really glad I cheated on my wife and
yeah.
shit away my marriage." And like, I don't know of a success story there. Does that make sense? I know a lot of failure stories there, and that's kind of where it came. I started becoming that guy that almost planned my recreation around booze related activities. You know what I mean? And it became aware to me that, like, dude, I mean, I was a fucking alcoholic there for a while. And like I say, I still drink. I had some whiskeys last night, but I hate getting drunk. I hate it. And
I don't. I love it, and that's the fucking problem.
and like I need it. I actually had a thought after listening to this podcast, like, you know what, man, I might cut it out for a little bit. Like, I might and just see. And not like I did dry January, and it there's nothing good like that comes from it other than it can help you relax. It can in a social environment. Like I love being at the cabin with you and Perry, Luke, and having a few beers and talking about hunting and talking about childhood and John Wayne and whatever the fuck we talk. Like there's a lot of great memories with that, and there's a lot of camaraderie in that. And I'm not saying it's because of booze, but there's something satisfying about working your ass off all week and having a few beers, with your wife by a fire after the kids go to bed on a Friday night. And I don't knock people that do that, and I don't knock boozing. I try not to be a judgmental guy as a whole, but I will say, like, if like you were saying, if it starts to control your life, or like me there for a while, like I was planning my weekends around getting drunk. Does that make sense? And like that's
Dude,
when you're like, dude,
I went through a
this
period
is
of my
not
life where I didn't have a weekend where I wasn't like getting drunk and blacking
yeah.
out. Like when
And
some
it
of
was
my
just the
buddies,
thing you did. It was
yeah,
almost
I
like
mean,
a
but
fucking
it's part of that warrior culture that
yeah.
comes up. It's like, what do? You go get drunk and you chase women,
Well, bro, we
and
used
like,
to if we drank 30, if one of us drank 30 beers the last weekend, the next weekend, be like, all right, I'm going to out drink you and I'm going to drink 35, and it's just like, it doesn't,
oh,
to what
it's
end? To what end?
exactly. And like, I look back at some of the immature decisions, and I mean, I got lucky. I don't need to go into all the stories, but like the money that I've wasted, I've probably spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on the bars over the course of my life. Like it's wild, and like I said, I'm not saying I'm never going to have a beer again, because I probably will. And I didn't set out to even stop drinking this long, but since I've cut it out, I haven't seen a reason to go back. And, I'm jumping out of the army. I'm betting on myself with this business and like how I'm going to support my family. And like, can I really afford to be hamstringing myself? Can I have 3 days of brain fog, and a hangover that lasts for a long time and like run slower? Like my mind works really quickly, which is why I like to slow it down. But like, I need it to work quickly? And then like to your point, when you're talking about relaxing in social settings, I agree. I mean, that's how I've done social settings most of my adult life. But now I'm starting to get to the point of like addressing why I can't relax in social settings. And I'm not there yet, but I want to put that work in so I can sit there and decompress without using a foreign substance that is just a poison in my body. And I think once I get to that point, I can kind of fix all this, and maybe it won't be completely fixed, but at least understand it. Then maybe I'm in a position mentally to be able to have a few beers, and it doesn't control my life. I've never been at the point where it's like, oh, I got to drink this morning. Like, and that's why I've always rationalized to myself that I haven't had an issue with it, is because I can stop whenever I want.
You
I
are
don't have to
dependent
have
on it,
it.
but
Exactly. Like, but it's, and then back to like, that's what Kyle talked about. And that shit hit me like a fucking baseball bat to the face of like, oh fuck,
podcast. I'm
that's,
curious about that.
that's me. Yeah. He's the one that responded to the hotel attack in
Yeah.
Mali by himself. And then he had a bunch of shit coming out of that. And like, that's a heavy podcast, man. It's one of the best ones I've listened to, but not to go down, we've doubled our normal time here, but I think that this conversation needed to kind of be longer because it took us a little while to get warmed up on the direction that it was going. Um, yeah, you're not alone. Like whoever's out there, and it doesn't have to be military. Like trauma comes in all waves, and trauma is relative. Like a dude that's been in a lot of gunfights might have a really, really hard gunfight or a hard experience in that'll have the same physiological and psychological effect as like a minor car crash where somebody gets banged up and bloody if you've never had that experience before. And
For
don't
sure.
compare your trauma to somebody else's. And I'm not trying to say trauma in the way that it's become like in vogue, like there's like this weird mental health badge that the younger generations are kind of wearing. I mean it in like the literal sense of whatever it went through. And we tend to do that as vets. And then we see it. We're back to the law enforcement thing. Like my EMS buddies have seen way worse shit than I have. Like one of my good buddies who we grew up together in Georgia when I lived there, like he had to pull a baby out of a fucking toilet. Like, like in Atlanta. Can you imagine? Like that compares to it, like or anything that I've been through fails in comparison to that.
Yeah.
But the veterans kind of get the press on that side, and it's like everybody has gone through something, and don't compare yours to somebody else. And that was one thing that Tom Satterley talked about that really changed my perspective on it. When I mentioned earlier, like this idea of like I haven't earned the ability to have PTS necessarily. Like
The same.
it doesn't matter. Like the effects are the same, and some of it's cumulative. Like you can be going through the exact same thing, and that person probably was earlier. They just didn't acknowledge or address it, and it's just continued to build. And so
Yeah.
you look inward on yourself and work through it, whether you want to do that through therapy or through brothers and sisters or through whatever that outlet is. I mean, the outdoors, I mean, that's the whole mission behind what we're doing here, is like healing through community in the outdoors. And I truly to my core think that would fix 80 to 90% of the mental health problems in this country when combined with proper nutrition and training.
Yep. 100%, man.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good summary of all that, man. It's solid.
Yeah.
So want to wrap this one up with Evan requested with Hero Week that we do Solis because of his relationship. Derek Chad also knew Chris Solis. I'm gonna read his write up, and that's kind of how we'll wrap this one up. This one hits close to home. I didn't know him at all, but like having 3 of my friends that close friends, and I mean Evan's my fucking brother. Like it shit's real. Like sometimes you look at these workouts and you just like Murph, right? We're so removed from it and it's always in your face. Like that's why I think Hero Week, it's one of the reasons why I did it, because it's not to take away anything from Murph. Like I love that that's a thing because it brings it up in the forefront for a lot of people, but there's more stories to tell. So I'm going to go through it and read this. And Evan, at the end of it, we'll hold for a second. If you have any comments or anything further that you'd like to add, we'll roll that, and then we'll just wrap this one up. Does that work?
Yeah, for sure, brother.
All right, this is straight off of the Army.mil Medal of Honor. So this is the write-up. So the battle, July 12th, 2018, Patika Province, Afghanistan. Sergeant First Class Christopher A. Solis distinguished himself by acts of gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty while engaging with the enemy in Patika Province, Afghanistan on July 12, 2018. As the leader of a special operations unit comprised of partner forces and members of the 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, Solis led an operation to clear an area of enemy forces and thereby disrupt future attacks against the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. That's ISIS for those that don't know. Shortly after his team reached their initial objective, a large enemy force attacked. The enemy placed effective fire on him and his team, preventing them from maneuvering to a counterattack. Realizing the danger to his team in the operation, Solis voluntarily exposed himself to intense enemy machine gun fire and small arms fire. Under fire, he retrieved and employed a heavy weapon system, thereby allowing U.S. and partner forces to regain the initiative, maneuver to a secure location, and begin treating a critically wounded partner force member. As the medical evacuation helicopter arrived, it was immediately engaged by accurate and sustained enemy fire. Knowing how critical it was to quickly load the wounded partner, Solis willingly exposed himself again to heavy enemy fire so he could take charge to direct and lead the evacuation. As the casualty was moved from a position of cover, Solis made a conscious effort to ensure his body acted as a physical shield to protect his team, the injured partner, and the crew of the aircraft from the enemy fire. After the wounded partner was loaded, Solis' team returned to cover, but he remained with the aircraft, returning a high volume of fire and constantly repositioning himself to act as a physical shield to the aircraft and its crew. With his final reposition, Solis placed himself directly between the cockpit and the enemy, ensuring the aircraft was able to depart. Upon the helicopter's liftoff, Solis was hit by enemy fire. Fully aware of his injury, but understanding the peril to the aircraft, Solis motioned to the pilots to depart rather than remain to load him. His selfless actions saved the life of the evacuated partner force member and almost certainly prevented further casualties among the members of his team and the aircrew. Solis died as a result of his injuries. His extraordinary heroism and selflessness beyond the call of duty were in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army. Throughout the entire engagement, Solis significantly changed the course of the battle by repeatedly placing himself in extreme danger to protect his team and defeat the enemy.
Yeah. I feel my voice shaky, but
that got me, man. I can't read. Oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, knowing Chris, hearing that, and I've heard that, I watched his award ceremony. We all watched it at the shop because a lot of the guys in my unit knew him well. But so some of the details that are missing from that write-up, and understandably so, but I think is imperative to point out is when that partner force got injured and they called for CASEVAC, they were under very heavy fire. And the enemy was basically had them in almost a 360, but they brought in dust off medevac. And the coordinates they had given the pilots, y'all know how pilots are. They think they know better than the guys on the ground oftentimes, at least the bad pilots. The good pilots usually are pretty good about listening to what the dudes on the ground are saying. And they were going to land the helicopter and use a building that they had as cover from the main advance of the enemy. And the pilots didn't like that area because it was too tight. It was a conventional unit flying dust off. It wasn't our SOA who we typically use. That was just who was responding that day. And the pilots landed between the enemy and the compound that Chris and his team were on, obviously exposing the aircraft to an onslaught of enemy fire and them. The enemy recognizing the helicopter was coming in. They started getting more aggressive and started basically assaulting the objective. Chris and his team recognized that, and they came out to try to cover the aircraft. Because once the aircraft's on the ground, you know what I mean? It's you're basically like, all right, it's go time. We got to get the casualty to the aircraft. So Chris picked up a Mark 48 belt-fed 7.62 machine gun, ran out there, and started laying waste, man. And the summary does cover that part. He was using his body as a shield and just hammering the enemy. The part that really speaks to Chris's character. When he got shot under the armpit, and he knew he got hit, and it was a um, got it was a double lung hit. And after the evac, the bird was picking up, and they saw Chris drop, and his team had because his team was the one carrying the casualties. They dropped the casualties off of the helicopter, and Chris was covering their egress. And then they got to a position they were returning fire to cover Chris after the bird was going to flush, because Chris was on the opposite side of the bird between the enemy and the helo. So the bird flushes, and so Chris's team, and again, I had deployed with Chris. I was not on this mission with him, though. I want to caveat that. I should have. But firsthand accounts from guys that were is where I'm getting this information. Chris gets hit, goes down. They see that. They start bounding towards him, and the pilots saw that, and they started to come back down, but the helicopter was receiving heavy fire. Chris knew that. And Chris, in his last breaths, waved the helicopter off and was basically gave him a thumbs up, I'm good, signaling get the casualty out of here. They lifted off, and then Chris collapsed. His team suppressed the enemy, got him, and and ended up they didn't find the entry wound until he was already medevac, because it was right in the armpit. He wasn't bleeding that bad, and it was just one hole, man. Sorry, it's tough to talk about that one. But
good, man.
Went out pretty strong there. Solid ass guy. And I never met his wife and daughter, but I heard how he talked about them, and I think that's one of the hardest things for me is he was such a damn good dad. His little girl was his life, and
yeah, man, it makes you want to be a better husband and a better father.
Yeah, for sure. But
no, man, I appreciate that story, dude. Man, we said it before, dude. If you've got to go, that's how we want to go. You said it too, man. Don't be sad for him. You be sad for his family. But
yeah,
he did what we all volunteered to do, what we all would have willingly done as well. I mean, maybe not quite to the extent that he did, because some guys like him go above and beyond, dude. But keeping his memory alive, man, that's fucking awesome.
Yeah, and if there's one thing I want to close out here with, Luke, I hope his wife and daughter knows how we all saw him. I hope they know that, and I know they do, because of the Ranger community has embraced them wholeheartedly. I'm not a Ranger. I've had the absolute honor of serving with them on countless deployments, but I hope his wife and daughter know what a hero he was, and what an awesome man he was. And when he was on that team, he was either a motor sergeant, or he wasn't even
I think he's a field artilleryman, if I remember.
Well, I'm saying he wasn't even he wasn't a platoon sergeant. He was basically there filling a gap for someone else. You know what I mean? And just rose to the occasion.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was an E7 grabbing a Mark 48 and taking the fucking fight. That's, he's a fucking warrior, and he went out like a fucking warrior. And I appreciate you sharing that, man. I know it's tough. It got me, and I didn't know him. I appreciate everybody listening to me fumble fuck through the reading, but that story needs to be told. And when we do this, this will air on Thursday. I believe his workout's on Friday. When you guys are executing this, think about Chris, think about his story. And that's the whole point. It's 7 days of a little bit of hardship for us to do some workouts in the comfort of a gym or our own homes. But think about them when you're struggling and you're thinking about how much it sucks. It pales in comparison to what these guys went through, and the courage and the bravery, and the courage and the bravery are the ones that they left behind, like that can't be stated enough either, is like how strong these fucking women are. And then what these kids have to go through. Like these kids are going to be raised without a father, and because he paid that to this country. And yeah, I know we're all fathers, and that hits home for us. So
Yeah,
I think this is a good time to wrap it up.
for sure. For sure. Well, I appreciate it, boys. This was a good one. It was a tough one. It's deep, heavy, but
Yeah,
good.
this is
Yeah.
the hardest podcast I've ever done. That's for sure. But
Same.
I'm glad we did it. I didn't foresee it kind of going the way it did, or that we'd go for 2 hours. But if you guys have hung out with us, I appreciate you guys going the double length. But thank you guys for Evan and Kerri for being on this. To all the vets that are on the team, and the guys that are still in active duty, I love you guys. If you guys ever need anything, like, that's why we're here, and all our listeners. And then on the civilian, first responder, EMS, like, it's all a brotherhood and a family. And if you're not any of those, and you're just part of this community and part of our community, like, you're that means something. That's why this is bigger. We're not a veteran company. We're not a veteran team. Like, this is for our people that have the value sets, and we're here for each other. And next year, I don't want to be talking about any of our brothers and sisters in memoriam. I want to talk about how we're moving forward and getting better. So I love you guys. As always, we appreciate the hell out of you. Thanks for the support. Have fun with the Hero Week. Get some recovery, drink some water. Thanks.